Welcome to this video. This video is a continuation of the former video. Haplogroup R burned all forest and degenerated soils before forming black mats. Further, I argue that the presence of such local organic material on the places where black mats were formed would have been impossible, because any significant amount of organic material, like natural forests, was burned or removed or, even, already absent at the time of the extinctions, as in the case of Lommel, Belgium, that come before and separate from the black mat that is draped above the fossils of extinct Clovis-like humans and animals including extinct Megafauna. In these places Clovis-like humans were present in the locations that only later black mats would form, before at least partly for similar reasons as the haplogroup R wanted to be present so much that they made the efforts in overturning the Clovis-like humans. The main difference was that the by the Clovis-like humans produced products were inferior or rather more primitive, today's standards, compared to the products produced by new arriving haplogroup R. This is evidenced in certain geological profiles in the supposed meteorite impact sites. I argue that the removal of forest, if, still, present at the time of the extinctions, was essential, a sine qua non condition, in and for the extinction of humans, animals and megafauna. If forests had not been first destroyed, humans from the Clovis cultures, animals and megafauna that all depended on and thrived in such forests would hide, survive and thrive in these very forests, and possibly organize or execute counterattacks and impede the for the haplogroup R essential production of, exchange of and trade of the products made in the blast furnaces. The production, exchange and trade of the blast furnace products on its turn was essential for the survival and the turnover activities of haplogroup R, the newcomers and invaders. This is because haplogroup R arrived as mature, developed organizations, that soon had to develop their developed and relatively complex societies, and economies, also meaning they were specialized, and the survival and success of the whole of their culture and turnover depended on all specializations, including food production. Something like an army that is involved in an offensive or invasion has to dispose of food reserves, kitchens etc., and mobility. In the case of haplogroup R they had to produce the food reserves and conservation was more limited. So the invaders or haplogroup R had no other choice than to radically cut or burn any kind of forests, rather destroy the forest etc. in the most radical and irreversible ways possible. There is evidence, and I will present cases and sites that present this evidence, that they cut forest, used the wood of the forests and also burned it in their blast furnaces to produce product for warfare, logistics, the offensive etc., chariots, wagons, weapons, ceramics, glass. The direct environment of haplogroup R should be clear or cleared from forests and present certain areas apt for agriculture and for the grazing of certain domesticated animals. What I can tell is that even in more modern times, like for the last 200 years, waste from furnaces was used for centuries and still is used for road building, pavement, building materials etc. In general the military like or prefer open spaces with no trees and vegetation, and low maintenance, which is the case because the blast furnace waste, as well as tailings, is toxic for most plant growth, also because of leaching of toxics for years or even many centuries. Nevertheless, at some point, possibly thousands of years, these initially toxic black mats can turn the soils more productive in certain cases. Plant and animals that marks the burning and degeneration by haplogroup R. The plant typical for the younger dryas and areas with black mats, DRYAS octopetala, is more resistant to these toxins and degenerated or destroyed soils than plants in general. On their turn certain domesticated animals like sheep induced erosion, hindered the regeneration of forests and produced products like wool for the haplogroup R that would also herd them or mass harvest them. Burning of forest and degeneration of soils led to extinctions. Hence Clovis-like cultures, hunter-gatherers, and animals that depended on forest, its productivity and its biodiversity went extinct. This waste and possibly tailings is what was found in the researched supposed meteorite impact sites and confused with the supposed impact of a meteorite. As said, I will present cases and sites that present this evidence for the claims I make in this video. It is nearly evident that on a global scale large amounts of CO2 would have been released in the lower atmosphere. If you follow consensus, then this release would have been only around the time of the meteorite impact, green arrow pointing upwards. In my JM hypothesis this would be the period before the green arrow pointing upwards, but also during the formation of black mats. Correct dating of warming and start of younger dryas. If enough sites with black mats could be time-stamped that would most probably reveal the period with the highest amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, as well as the consequent warming. In my opinion, that would be the best way to better define the period that we today know as the Younger Dryas, amongst others, because it most probably would coincide with the abundance of the plant markers, like DRYAS octopetala. End observation. This video is about the hypotheses of the author, J.M., and not about present-time climate change. Further, I am convinced that all initiatives of and info provided by the UN regarding climate are very useful and necessary. To learn about present-time climate change, please consult What is Climate Change? United Nations. Thank you for watching. Bye.